Welcome to the GameDev.tv Community Podcast. I'm your host KB, and I would like to introduce you to industry professionals and people who successfully made their path to the video game industry. I hope that you will enjoy the podcast and get useful tips that will bring you closer to achieving your dreams. Now, let's get right into the podcast.
I'm Sean Gorman. I'm a level designer working at nDreams, but my background is also in environment art. So as well as architectural visualization, I've also worked in virtual reality and working in that way, and then games as an environment artist, and then games as a level designer. So I've gone on quite a journey, but it's given me quite a unique perspective as I'm able to understand both skill sets. And so that's where I'm at now and moving forward. So yeah, awesome. Thank you for having me, dude.
Oh, of course. It was a hard to get you on, but once we did, I'm pretty sure it's gonna be amazing. We're gonna have a great conversation.
Got there in the end.
We did. Oh, you guys don't even know, guys. It took me forever to get them on, but it's gonna be great. So I'm curious, how did you get started with your game development journey?
How far back? Like, as in, like playing games as a kid? And, it was a little boy. Yeah, I mean, we can go back, and everyone's got those sort of stories, right? Like, from you pick up a controller for the first time, and in my case, it would probably be, everyone picks, here's the first game I played, and they imagine it's like a really, really like phenomenal game, and they memorable experience, and it was a brilliant game, right? Usually, but I think most people are just telling a little fib, because they usually play like one game that's just not great, and then the first game that they enjoyed is the first game they talk about. Mine was a Star Wars game which you play as Gungans, which is like an RTS, and so that doesn't age well whatsoever. You're like a world builder. So, but yeah, anyway, that's going back. So actually, answer the question is, it would be. I played games all the way through my childhood, from my teens, through school, early days, secondary school, and then you got college. So in the UK, college is something like you do that for 2 years, and then you go to university. So, and in college, I actually did fine art, history, and English. Had no idea what I was doing. Let's be real. And so rather than follow a lot of people into university, because I didn't know what to do, or follow other route into full-time employment, doing anything, I took up another course in art and design, and that was like something that I felt like I was good at, and I got a lot of good feedback on. So I found myself with a little bit more time to develop, and in those, I'd say in the 3 or 4 months doing that course, that actually didn't do all that much for me, but it just allowed me time to think about it. I'd say it was a fine art course, so you got a lot of people there who taking pictures of himself in the bath because they want to go to Goldsmiths and do fine art, because that's art. I was instead not doing any of that. I was learning about concept art. I discovered that year, like a very seminal moment, I discovered that games is a job. Like, you can actually do this art stuff for the things that I loved for a living. And I'm like, right, I'm in. And then I started
like the moment of an explosion where you were like, I can have fun and make games and get paid for it.
Yes, I remember the artists where I saw this for the first time, their names. So from Feng Zhu on YouTube, I remember seeing all of his library, and it's now a massive library of YouTube videos that he would collate, or even Mark Molnar. You also got a lot of the guys over from Naughty Dog, because that was around the same time that The Last of Us came out, and I had to play. I got the chance to play that.
It's a beautiful game.
Yeah, and so I found out from then on that this is a career. Like, people can do this as a career. And that was a seminal moment for me. And then from then on, looked into courses and just jumped on straight into there. And so it developed and developed and developed. But that's the inception. That's really where the journey began.
Okay. And so you're talking about concept art. So how do we go from concept art to level design? Or did you just the learning from all the courses, you were like, which one do I really like the most?
Big jump, eh?
Yeah.
So my whole background I could condense into just art. It would be from an art background. I was told then, and I think I agree with this now, though I haven't really thought about it, but I do. It's very hard to teach people to see. So for example, like drawing in perspective is very difficult especially for young children. Like, but they tend to draw just sort of very two-dimensional images. And that sort of stuff is very hard to do. It takes years. So if you're doing it at an early age, you kind of get a little bit of advantage. And then when you get to college and you start doing this sort of stuff, and then it translates into three-dimensional work, 3D work, 3D environment work, concept art, all this, which is really, it's for a 3D world. Learning the software is not as difficult. It is hard, but it's very difficult to teach people how to see. And so with that background and with that discipline and with that sort of in my back pocket.
And you heard this when you
I remember hearing this when I was younger, like learning from my art teacher years ago. Yeah, and it was talking about at that point it was from university. They were getting applicants from like games tech backgrounds into a games art course, and they wanted to be 3D environment artists. And he saw there anyway that they didn't have the art skills, but they had the tech skills. And and in his experience, teaching for many years, decades even, it was harder to teach them how to be artists as a comparison to teaching artists how to use technology. And that example like carried out through even into architecture, which was my first job. I worked as a visualization artist for the guys that had done like visualization for the Shard in London. Very
wow.
Really? Big, sort of big, yeah. They work with Make, who did everything for a lot of skyscrapers and towers across London. So that AVR London, they're a brilliant company, and the same sort of thing was there. Rather than hiring sort of architects and then teaching them how to use Unreal Engine and that sort of 3D VR technology, they hired people from games and people who worked in that field. Again, same sort of principle. It was easier to teach those people, sort of, I guess, architectural principles as opposed to getting so a little bit like that, but I don't know where I was going with that, but there we go. That was my little intro, and that was just from university. I was still studying while I was getting my first free jobs, I suppose. I was still studying at university.
Look at you, dude. Probably what, like 80 hours a week of work, 40 hours a week of working and 40 hours of studying, something like that?
I would love to be able to say that was me and I did all of that. No, I took a this is where they have a little, I took a gap year would be, and in a working year, I worked between my second year and my final year, I worked for about 18 months. And that experience, by the time then I went back to university, got the degree, graduated, all that experience and the portfolio landed me a job in AAA.
Look at that. So you must have did something right.
Something.
But let's get to the eye. Saying people can see it. What does that mean to you? Because I get what that means, but like, how can someone get to that point? Like, what is the eye? What is looking at art and be like, hey, that's art and that's bad? It's like, how do you get to that point?
I think it's less, so it's not, for me anyway, it's been very difficult to look at fine art this way. It's more about like real world, like how we look at everything, how we perceive something. And it's like a language that we all know. Like when you look at a film, for example, and like the faces are all 3D generated and they're a little bit off, there's the uncanny valley, and you don't know why it feels wrong, but you know it's wrong. And what I mean by that is we all speak this language, we all know this visual language, but it's being given I guess the right words to describe it, or the right tools to be able to manipulate it and do it yourself. So it might start, for example, with just drawing in perspective. If me as a child, I would draw, and if I drew anything, I'm always thinking about it as just a 2D thing, a 2D shape. And then it was a level of complexity when I needed to add like 3-dimensional elements to it, and I draw in perspective, whether that's 2-point perspective or 3. And you have to then think about where your horizon line is, and where you're thinking about, like, not only that, but if you're creating a cool looking image, composition, and where a lot of elements of of drawing elements and fundamentals. You're learning as you go, and so I learned a lot of that through school, through college. Yeah, and I had some great tutors who taught me all of those things. But that comes with time, and I think, of course, that time, which was school and college, I'm sure you could condense that into a lot smaller a time if it was really focused. But it comes with a lot of practice and just being given. Yeah, a lot of practice, and I'm really not sure where else, actually. I'll really have to think about it a little more. But it's difficult.
Oh yeah, I bet. Because it'd be like somebody, let's say they're starting out now, I don't know, give an age around like 30, 40, and they wanted to develop the eye. It's like, how do you get that? Do you just draw from other artists and try to like continue to draw that stuff, or do you try to do your own thing with learning like different there's so many things to it. I wonder how you could improve that.
I'd probably recommend a couple things. What I'd started, I remember way back when I had a tutor and he was a photographer, and he said something about there was two ways you could teach people. I think even his tutor, there's two ways he had about teaching. You tell the whole class to take 100 photos, and you just take as many as you can. You capture absolutely everything, or you tell other members of the class to spend all of that time, all of the time it would take to get 100 photos, all of that time you spend to make one photograph, take one photograph, and you're really forced to think. And so if it's just thinking about a two-dimensional image, you're thinking, why do I pick that one image? Why? What's significant about what I'm looking at? And that's just, that's composition. So if you to play that little experiment forward, you're then thinking, I need to have something that's meaningful. Well, how do I get something that's meaningful out of an image? All right, cool. Well, I need to then bring focus to something, because this is maybe it has an actual object or a person that you want to photograph. Stuff like that. And that's one early exercise that I remember. But otherwise, also for drawing, I remember years ago, reading articles, looking at it was like Gumroad tutorials I had from very prominent artists who had made quite a lot of good stuff, and they were explaining all of their processes, but they were explaining their thought patterns too, which was just a lot more. Although it was very, what's it called? So they were soft skills, so they could be transferable, and all of those skills have helped me. Because I'm not a concept artist, but they help those skills taught by a concept artist help me get into environment art, and then those skills I learned in environment art and also from those concept artists have certainly helped me in my position as a level designer. It's just thinking, it's transferable skills would be the word so I'd use. But I'd start there.
What are some things you are thinking about when you're drawing? Because honestly, when I draw, it's like I just want to create the best thing that I could draw, but like that's only because I'm not an artist. But like, what do you think?
So you're trying to create like a meaningful image. If it's going to be a specific, like the shot you've got on your background, right? You've got foreground elements which constrain and frame your view. You've got midground elements which still lean into your backdrop, but you have a sense of perspective. You have a sense also because of direction. I think you're going to, in that image, be leaning. Everyone's now looking at your face.
Like, look at him.
A sense of direction for the road too, right? That leads behind you. So you think, okay, where does that lead? And it gives you not an emotion, but a thought. You're thinking path. Actually, if we see a path, me and you, we understand that it must lead somewhere. Where does this lead? And then also a negative space and positive space. We've got a lot of negative space here. So you've got the sky that also helps to then bring your eye back towards that path. The lighting and sort of that sunbeam bringing you in that direction. Yeah, all of these things, and so, all the visual elements that should just pull you into, in this case, that one image. But where it then evolves from concept art or 2D to two-dimensional images, which would be composition, like as an image composition, where then you move into 3D and you move into games, is where it goes into spatial composition. And so this is a cool image as well. What does this play like? When I turn around, what's behind me? What can I see if I go follow that path? And you're thinking about how all of those tie together. So and that's what I mean about soft skills. I'm creating a couple of these little views when I'm making the stuff in the games that I make, and then I'm placing little details, little subtle elements that should lead or guide the player or give some sort of intentionality.
And so when you think about it, this is like right before you do anything, you're seeing a white blank space. You're like, okay, I'm gonna create something that's gonna. You basically just come up with the idea first. I'm gonna make a type of city with a road, and then you just build from there.
I guess it would be what am I trying to communicate? So,
Okay.
and this would apply really to in career as well, working in studio. So as a level designer, we are trying to communicate so we've got metrics, we've got gameplay mechanics, and you've also got like sort of look and feel. In a certain level, let's give an example. Let's say in The Last of Us, it's my favorite game, which it's difficult for me to say because I have a lot of favorites. But
we can talk about that later too.
Absolutely. Let's pick the level. Like there's a level, we'll say inside of.
Oh, we can go. So there's the
anyone. Give me anyone.
There's a scene where Ellie and Joel get mad at each other. Well, Joel's basically like, don't ever bring like Sarah up, and like, you're not my daughter. You know that one scene?
In the farmhouse, right?
Yeah.
Cool. So on your journey there, and so I have not worked at Naughty Dog. I've just played this game. I've played about like 200 hours of this game, by the way.
Oh, wow.
No joke. And
it's that good though. I get it. Yeah.
It's very good. And that farmhouse. So all the journey on the way there. There must have been a conversation between the people who wrote the sort of script for this and the people who made all of the mechanics to get you there and all of the artists that worked on the stuff. That there's absolutely a communication. What mood are we trying to convey? And when you are following the tracks, the trail of that horse, you're constantly looking to the floor, but everything else around the scene is kind of guiding you. And sometimes they're tricking you as well. You might find you go one direction and then you have to double back because you realize you've just hit a fence and, oh, well, actually, no, the tracks do lead that way. I was going, and it course corrects, and you feel like you're going through a journey. And that is tied in with environmental storytelling, that is signposting, that's lighting, that's everything. And this is the job of the level designer, is to make sure all of those things marry perfectly to tell and convey the right emotions, tell the story. And so by the time you get there, after having your traversal through the mountains and having time to breathe between encounters, because I remember there is an encounter between when you first leave your brother's like encampment and when you find Ellie. And then as soon as that cutscene ends, we remember that after that very kind of like jaw-dropping moment, and like, you're holding your breath as you're watching them essentially argue, then a fight comes along and you're tired and you're frustrated, but oh my God, and your hair goes up. You're thinking, right, we have to get out of here, but you're still quite down. And all of these things, all emotions, they have to then carry through the level. And these are important. And you can do these in a number of ways. It could be just how you compose the space, how you assemble your space with all the shapes that you choose, and what you're forced to do, what actions you're performing, more particularly. Is it mundane tasks? Is it like an actual hard to do activity? Like a combat, sometimes is something that requires skill, that requires you to think. And all of these things. So
Wow. So
that would be one example.
So essentially, being any creative person, like an artist or anything, is you have to literally sit there and plan everything out. It isn't like this. Like I guess there's a misconception. People think it's just like I sit down there and I draw something amazing. And sure, that can happen occasionally, but like to really create something that's kind of visual story and it's something that you find meaningful, you gotta literally have the time to plan it out, think about it, and then you go do it.
That's key. If you don't have that time as well, you're kind of doing things on the fly, and it's like right. If George R. R. Martin wanted to write Game of Thrones, but he had 20 minutes to do it, I'm sure all of those little links wouldn't find themselves there so well. If you had to write the whole thing from beginning to end, you wouldn't get that moment where you go, oh, wow, I didn't know those two things were linked. I didn't know those characters. I mean, if you've not read or understand Game of Thrones, you would understand what I mean. It's just hard to do. and that these things take a long time to plan and to really plan so precisely. But it's not that we also have a lot of we have complete control in all aspects. We are just trying to learn what others want to do and try to communicate that ourselves. We might have some input, but we are not like kings of every castle. We don't tell artists throughout like the whole art department from tippity top to bottom, here's what I want in my level. We're asking them as well, like, what else can we do? Is there an art style we need to match? And we need to think about that when we're making our blockouts. And then we're also trying to learn from the people making the mechanics in the game. How can we best utilize your mechanics? And yeah, sometimes there's a back and forth. You might find that there are little spots empty here, there, gaps in the process, and we're just trying our best to like patch those up, get everyone to talk, communicate, so that everyone's on the same page, and we can all make an experience that is satisfying for the player, and that marries all of these departments together properly. And that, I think, is something I'm able to do, and I feel I'm able to do quite well, is because I've had that environment art background, and now working in a design department, I know what it's like on the other side of the fence, you know, where the grass is greener or whatever. I can see some of the problems that one individual might have as an artist or as a designer, and try my best with my experience to then just help where I can. And that could just be conversation, or it could actually be like problem solving. It depends on what we're doing in what game and what project. But yeah, it's important that essentially level designers are responsible for their work,
I like that.
and do their best to be, I'd say, peacekeepers as well.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, did you have a moment where you were doing some of the stuff, let's say you got the architecture job, do you feel like you weren't going in the right direction that you wanted to go? And now looking back, you're like, oh, everything was just connecting the dots to lead me to here. But like during the moment, did you feel like, hey, I'm not doing games, I'm not really where I want to be? Did you ever feel like you were stuck or going the wrong way?
I think so. Yeah, a couple of times maybe. I worked in at AVR London for architectural visualization. I really loved that job. That was really fun. The people there were great. I've worked at a couple of places, and I've been quite lucky actually that I've not met barely anyone that I disagree with or have had a problem working. Everyone I've met has been rather lovely. So I'm very, very lucky there in that regard. And so that was one example. It was just perfect. The studio was fantastic. The people I worked with were great. But the actual industry, I wasn't married to. I wasn't. Buildings are cool, I guess. It's okay.
Sure.
But I studied games. I wanted to make games, and so I felt like that was a stepping stone. And I learned a tremendous amount, like from the people I worked with there. So that was one markable moment. I could say that I needed to then make a change, and then I course corrected. Even though after that I did go to Munich, I worked for BMW, and I did cars and all this malarkey for a couple of months before then going, I want to actually jump into games again while I've got this opportunity. And something popped up. I took the bull by the horns and jumped straight in and worked for Bulkhead Interactive in Derby as an environment artist there. So that felt like like a Goldilocks thing. It felt like, the other one, something wasn't right. But then, okay, now this one seems better. But then you quickly find that, so there's also something else missing, or maybe something I'd like to try over there. And I still felt like I was quite early in my career, and I went back to university, thought I want to learn a little bit more while I've got the opportunity. And then when I applied for jobs and said that I was open for work, the Rocksteady thing popped up. And then again, to come back to your question, I felt like from now, like where we are now, December 2020, from about maybe a year to a year and a half ago, because I was at Rocksteady for about 2.5 years, I felt like I'd done everything. Like I achieved everything I wanted to do. I got my dream job working as an environment artist for one of the best companies on the planet in video games. And but there was just something not right, and I wasn't sure whether or not it was if it was the studio, oh no, or if it was like the project, oh no. I was actually looking at me and I was going, what's wrong with me? Am I doing something wrong? And looking introspectively. And it took a lot of thinking, a lot of introspection to, go, well, this is a good job that I really did enjoy this here, but I'm ready for a new challenge. And I was starting to then learn a lot more, working very closely with designers, and working with good designers, as I tried to illustrate in the last question, good designers that try to incorporate everyone. I was feeling very included working with those designers, but because I saw more of their work, I grew more and more interested. And then I would go home and I would make not environment art, like bespoke portfolio work, like assets and all that, like my colleagues and my friends. I would go back and make levels and experiment in blueprints inside of UE4. And that's where I think, then at that point, it was a snowball effect. Things then started to get rolling, and I was like, I like my job, but I think I want to do something else. And that's where I made the jump into design.
Okay. And so these moments you've had are, like, for instance, going back to school, was that an easy moment to go back, or did you have to take some time and be like, hey, I want to go back to school? Or
Ooh, well, my employer was very respectful of that, which was fantastic. So to clear the context, I was in second year. I then moved into full-time employment. I was basically paused my education for a year, and then I did 2 internships in that, like 12 months. And then I thought, I actually want to continue doing this. And so my university agreed that he would spend his final year, and some universities do this here in England, where they agree, okay, he can fulfill his last year, all of the qualifications that he needs, all the assessments, everything. He can do that while in employment. They just send back the work that he's doing. We ask them, is he doing a good job, essentially, and they tick a box. I mean, if he wasn't doing a good job, they would just get rid of him, right? So I mean, they'll get rid of me. And so we did all that. Everything was ticked. Fantastic. Sean's going to stay, and that'll be that. And I think at that point, where I needed to make that decision, do I want to stay here for another year at that work and continue working on those projects and doing that job? Or do I feel like I've got this one opportunity now while I'm young, I mean reasonably young, I was like 23, to go study and pick like a really fine point about like environment art or whatever it was and learn it, like really learn it, because I wouldn't have as much time to do that while working full time. I mean, yes, I'm doing environment art, but I'm usually, most people working for someone else find themselves in this situation. You're doing someone else's work, and you're given that work. You're asked, do you want to do this? Can you do this? And then you go, yeah, sure. But sometimes it's not your choice, and sometimes you don't have that availability because of the project demands. So we were working on a first-person shooter. I was doing a lot of like assets. I was doing like foliage, creating all that sort of stuff. I was also doing like HUD elements. I was doing lighting and sky spheres. But I wanted to try some like hard surface like modeling and try to really understand new processes. It's very hard to do all of this and learn all of this while in full-time work outside of that. Go home after however many hours in a day, find the energy then to work outside of work. It's hard. So I took it upon myself then to, sorry, please.
Oh, you use like friends and family. You just get so busy to the point where you're like, I don't have time to do anything but just work and study, which is fine. But like for people mentally, that just starts to drain them over time. You're like, where's my friends? Where's the free time that I had? Like, I feel like I'm always working.
Yeah, absolutely. And I felt like I'd done that at university and paid the consequences for it as well, and so I learned there's almost the hard way. You got to work smart, not work hard. And so that was one decision I then made. It was it was hard. I remember sitting down in a cafe with my boss going, you know what, I really do appreciate it. And I feel to this day like I absolutely really do appreciate the opportunity I was given, but I've got this one shot now while I'm young, and while I've got the opportunity still here to go back to study again. I want to take this opportunity here and learn what I can. So in that time then I did go back and I did study and put in some long hours because I really wanted to make the most out of it. And yeah, and I learned and developed so quickly. Yeah, and so that changed my life, making that decision. So it did pay off in the end, but I won't lie, I did think at one point, oh, this might actually bite you in the bum.
Hmm. Did you
When you
almost ever give up?
essentially, yeah, I think there was a point I did. Imagine there's a point where essentially you leave full-time work doing the job that you enjoy, and then you leave thinking, maybe I've got more time to develop. They're like, whoa, 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 but you've got the job. Like you've got the job. You don't need to continue studying for the job you already have, right? That's kind of the feeling you'll have in your head,
Yeah.
or the thinking, sorry. And that's completely true. And so you would imagine, like where I was then, how many, maybe 3 years ago now, I'm starting to then put out the applications and start sending job applications out, and they're nothing, silence for a little while. And I'm still working on the portfolio; it's still going, but I've not got nothing to show yet. But people are getting into those jobs. I remember, colleagues, friends, and they're finding work, and I'm not, and it's not paying out. And I remember actually, yeah, there was a big position, like one I was really enthused about. I was like, this is it. And I got all the way through to the final interviews, and for anyone who goes through that process and then gets turned down, oh God, it's heart-wrenching. And I think that would be the point I did give up. And then, then something just came out of the blue, and it's really strange how fate is, or whatever it is. But yeah, how these things happen, and
When
then
you say
another
something,
opportunity
is that
popped up.
like school, a person, or like what?
Well, so the opportunity that I was talking about that I was turned down from was for like a big company that I really, really respected. I loved a certain
Yeah.
property, and so I was like really enthused about working on that. And yeah, it was just like you get thousands of applicants for these things, and
Hmm.
and they picked someone else, and rightly so.
Okay.
In that case, he was a very talented guy. I'm avoiding names almost.
Okay, that's
Uh,
fine.
but then with the next thing, so after that, I think it was even a week apart. A friend of mine reached out to me, having then seen all of my work where it was then published. It was like I wasn't showing. I hadn't finished my work when I was doing a lot of these interviews. When it was finally out and I got a lot of eyes on it, he reached out. He reached out to me, and he recommended me for the job at Rocksteady. So that's Ben Keeling, who is I wanted to say senior, but I think he's even advanced environment artist at Rocksteady. A very talented guy. And yeah, he recommended me for the job, 2 interviews, and then yeah, we were in there. Yeah, and so he saw something in me, and he saw something in my work. We had correspondence for a while, but yeah, that was just before that moment. I was certainly feeling like I've made a wrong decision here. You know,
That's a
uh,
horrible moment to feel. Like you're like, I've worked so hard, I spent all this money, and maybe this is the wrong thing. But it's also the healthy thing. It helps you move to somewhere better. Because if you just sit there and say, "Oh no, I'll brush it off. It's fine. I'm gonna have a great job," but it's like deep down, this thing's gonna grow. And maybe
mm,
5, 10 years from now, you would have been in a horrible situation because you didn't leave and try something new.
yeah, yeah,
So cheers
exactly.
to that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that also started because someone I'd worked with and he was a little older than me, like a couple of years older than me, um, and like we grew quite close, like working together. And like you when you're working, and sometimes you have like a couple of gaming sessions in the evening, and he would share with me if I had the opportunity to go back, if I had the time essentially to go back to study, because essentially what you're paying for when you pay for a university course and all that, you're paying for time. Let's be clear. Sometimes the tutelage isn't right, but you're paying for time. And he was like, if I had that opportunity, I'd take it because I would love to be able to learn X, Y, Z. And I was thinking to myself, you know what? Has he got some? Is he right there? And then that got all of those gears turning. And I thought to myself, yeah, maybe I want to do that while I have this opportunity. Once you're in full-time employment and you're out of university, it's very hard to do that. Well, if you wanted to spend 12 months of your life just learning a certain piece of software or a certain skill, I mean, some people just can't afford it. I couldn't afford it, back then at all. And even now, no, I probably couldn't. It's just difficult. So it was a unique time, but I feel like I made the right decision.
So I'm curious about when you say there's not enough like time, are you saying like not enough focus time to really learn what you need to learn? Like let's say if you put an hour every night after work, could you still try to learn what you learned in university? Or is just the university you try to learn so much that you Yes, you can maybe learn a skill, but you can't learn everything they would teach in university in like 1 to 2 hours a night for like the rest of the year.
Let's say I don't think there are processes that we use inside of our industry that you could probably teach or learn within a short span of time if you're quite new to it. I have experience inside of 3ds Max, ZBrush, modeling packages, Unreal Engine, other editors, all of that. But if I wanted to learn Houdini, which to me feels like a very different automated procedural package, there are similarities with some software that I've used, but it feels like a very different animal. And it will require, I just know, it will require energy for me to learn it. It's very different for me just to turn on the TV and just listen and pay no mind to really what I'm seeing and in a part relax, as a comparison to just turn on a YouTube video or a course and watch and really pay attention to it and learn it. It requires energy. And so when you've expelled so much energy through the day working full time, whether that's in retail, whether that's in games, whatever it is hard to find that motivation to come back home and study. So what I did, and I would recommend this, is, and this is something that I learned from a friend years ago, that motivation is fleeting and that discipline is really helpful if you're able to teach yourself. So like essentially a way of working that is has long-term benefit. So, for example, motivate. So have you heard of this before?
Yes. Yeah, actually, I love this because there's also another one called discipline equals freedom. So if you're disciplined with things, so even if you don't want to do it, like let's say you want money, you save money when you should have been like, oh, but I can go for a drink. You say no, or you just discipline in a lot of things. It allows you the freedom to do what you really want. You discipline your money, you can go where you want. Discipline your health, you're healthy, you don't have to worry about your health problems. You discipline with your work. You mean you're studying, you will then be able, you'll know your stuff, you'll ace that test, you do a good job on your project, your deadline, and things will work out for you. But it's about discipline, meaning you have to stop. Motivation can help you build systems and stuff. Motivation, like you said, is fleeting, but discipline is forever. Yeah.
And you can stumble on this too, right? Like with the motivation thing, you might watch a cool video, a cool film, and you go, I want to make something based on what I just saw because I feel inspired, I feel motivated, and I feel like I could continue doing this with this feeling I have right now forever. And the truth is that's not true. That it will sizzle out, and something might happen to you, whether that's in your personal life or whatever, that really changes you feel low and morale drops. And then that is where motivation suffers. It is short term, it's fleeting. And then, as you say, discipline, if you're able to teach yourself like a productive way of working, and it doesn't necessarily mean even just the way of working, but I want to say force yourself to work, but it's not even that. It's as I say earlier, it's working smart, like as opposed to working hard. Choosing a certain time in your week where you will work, and then trying your best to stick to it, but then giving yourself a reward when you do. And so it's encouragement, and you're doing that yourself. I've even done the most smallest example while I'm working remotely, because I can essentially just roll out of bed into the other room, and that's work. So what I found is, because while we were all working remotely during a global pandemic, is I spend a lot of time on my phone in the morning, and like usually about 40 minutes. Now that's not great. What am I doing? I'm just doing this. I'm just scrolling.
It's true, yes.
And I'm wasting 45 minutes of my day. Though, I might send a message to a friend, and that's cool. However, I noticed that that's time I'm losing, and I'm really not getting any significant thing out of that. So I disciplined myself, not like I hit myself. What I did is I just went, this phone at night, I throw it out of the room, and I close the door.
I saw a Twitter post about that.
And so the alarm,
one day I was like, I like that advice, so I threw my phone out
the alarm would go off in the morning, and so I hear it, but in the mornings where it was next to me, I just reach out of bed, turn off the alarm, and that's that. And then the alarm goes off in 10 minutes, and then that continues and continues. But now if it's outside the room, I have to get out of bed, I have to walk towards the door. Okay, now I'm halfway there to the shower, let's start the day. And that really helps, and that's discipline. That's what I mean. It's just it's trying your best to put yourself in a work mode, and giving yourself that time where you need it, if you feel that you need it. So I certainly felt like I needed those 45 minutes in the morning. I wanted to do more work in the morning. I didn't want to start later in the day. And that has, yeah, it changes my day. I can finish earlier. I can finish my work on time earlier. I get more out of my evenings with my partner. And yeah, it has a net benefit. And that's just one example of discipline. But I could list you quite a lot, which really helped, especially in university.
Mm-hmm. So now you found that through motivation or like books, or is there anything like specific that you like can say that like, hey, that's what showed me discipline, or was it just working on stuff and you're like, I don't want to do this 45 minutes?
No problem. I'd say it was a friend years ago who it was, you know, you look up to someone and they seem like they've got everything switched on. And I mean, sometimes comparing yourself to others is not beneficial. If you find that, you know, you're not in a good place and you're just comparing yourself to others as opposed to comparing yourself now to where you were before. Like, you know, if you look how far you've come, usually you find that you've progressed quite far. But there, in that case, it was a good example. I see he's leading a positive example, doing things that I'm not doing or I'm failing to do. Maybe I could learn a thing or two. So I spoke to him and he showed me a few things from a bullet journal, you know, where he essentially logs to do work inside of a physical notepad. And he would then tick those things off. He has like essentially a calendar inside of that as well. So I implore anyone who's listening to check out any kind of video. It's called Bullet Journal. And yeah, that really helped. And yeah, I started to follow his example. Or even a lifestyle I'd try that someone else gets up in the morning, they go to the gym, and I just gave it a go, see if I could try that. And me personally, I gave it a go. I gave it a go then, but I can't do that now. It's not for me. So at least I tried, and I noticed what's good for me and what's good for him. But yeah, that helped, and that example helped because I could then process my day better, and I was able to work optimally. And for me, putting it on paper and then seeing it as a task that I need to do rather than in my brain remind myself every other 30 minutes, by the way, have you done this thing? Because I will forget. It's something that I can then see, I can refer to, and I can tick off, and I feel good when I have done that. So it's all positive.
Did this take a long time for you to develop, or was it like in a week or a month, or did it was like finally after a couple of years you're like, this is it, this is the system, works perfectly for me?
I will fail, and I have failed constantly, and it's just about keeping those principles, like as a kid, maybe, you know, like a very young kid, like a toddler, and then they like hit another kid, and then they're told, hey, don't do that, and then they might a second time do it, and they're reminded again, hey, you're not supposed to do that. And then it's just practice. It's going, yeah, no, I shouldn't be doing this. And noticing those same trends even as an adult, of course, right? I'm getting up out of bed too late in my day. I'm doing this constantly. Is this costing me something? Yes. Can you change those things? And then noticing small little wins. So little things throughout the day. Could you just do this in a better way? Could you do this? And would this make your life easier? Yes. Why aren't you doing that? And yeah, and I will fail at those things. Like maybe 2 days ago, I got out of bed, I picked up the phone, and then I went back to bed. You know what I
mean? Yeah.
But I know that I've not followed through, and I feel guilty. And so
tomorrow, that's what I wanted to get on.
Yeah.
Do you have a system now where you don't get guilty? Because actually, I've gone to the point in the last couple of months where even if I fail at something, I've stopped making myself feel super guilty, because if I feel super guilty, then I get upset at myself and I'm not doing anything because and that's not productive at all too. So do you feel like you just, you're now guilty about it and you move forward, or you're guilty about it and it destroys you? Like, how do you handle guilt?
How about that? So to the example you just gave, I'll try another one, and then you tell me whether or not this is parallel. I came up with a calendar, and then if I worked a certain number of hours that day, this is when I was a student, if I worked a certain number of hours a day, that's a tick on that day. And if I get a number of ticks, so if I get 7 ticks, for example, I can give myself a reward. Like I could go and get I think it was back then, I would get like a chocolate bar or a cake or something. And that actually,
you really got earned.
Yeah, wow. Man. I mean, as when you're a student and you've got like no money, that's like a big deal. So
yeah.
Even now, with like a cake, I've not had a cake in ages.
You make the cake, or you go buy the cake?
I would buy the cake. I can't bake, sadly. But that's a reward. Now, what happens is if I get to then say day 14 or tick 14, no, or day 14, and I don't do that work, one of those rules that I'd set was I have to go back to 0, and then I have to start again, and that's the discipline thing. And it's not easy, and sometimes I would just bail out on the process altogether when I went straight back to square one, and then probably be a week where it's like, I failed one day, and now I can't get any reward for 7 days, so I'm not going to do it at all, and that was tough. So I think you just got to. Does that sound similar, like a similar sort of example, like where you just lose
that's exactly what
motivation, really?
Basically, isn't like the system was supposed to make you successful, but now it's also making you not at the same time, and we need to somehow fix that. Yeah, so that's exactly what I meant.
So change the system, and I mean, like, not like so we can't change like our environment, for example, but notice what things you can control and start to make changes there. And I learned that especially working in sales years ago is let's try to block out the things you can't control. Can you control your government? No. Can you control the weather? No. Can you control how other people think about you? No, not really. So what can you control? Okay, I can control what I spend my money on in the day, because that's my money. Or I can control what time I get out of bed in the morning, and then seeing and identifying what things you can control and then changing them. And so, or just the little small wins. So there, for example, in what we just mentioned, where I just bail out the process altogether, and I've now got some sort of process that I've put in place that doesn't work for me, and it feels more authoritarian than it does helping me. I would then just rewrite that system. I go, right, okay, so I need to then maybe try something else, or just give myself a little bit of a push in some way. So I would probably back then I just changed it a little bit. If rather than starting complete from scratch, you just lose 60 ticks. Maybe you just lose 1 or 2, and you're like, it's not so bad. But it is hard to bring to pick yourself up again. And ultimately, boil it down to recognize that if you're down, and know what can pick you back up again. So if I was feeling bad, feeling sad, angry, frustrated, I recognize that I'm not in a good place, stop working, and then recognize that I need to do something or speak to someone. And in my case, it was speak to my partner. And that will pick me up. Okay, she's got that. Got that over me where she could just sort of cheer me up. So that's very good. I'm very lucky. But before I met her as well, I recognized that it was playing an hour of a video game or looking through an art book. And then I felt like, you know what, I can do it. And then when you get to that point, you know what, you can do it. Write out what goals you've got. If you feel like you're not somewhere you are, write out that goal and then just look at it and go, I can do that. And just tell yourself you can, because you can. And then work bit by bit to get closer to that goal. And that goal could be at the end of the day, could be at the end of the month. But just think about second to second, minute to minute, hour to hour, week by week, month by month, year by year. And if you think of how long we spend on doing those things a day, that accumulates. How many hours of doing that a week? So, for example, how much work that I put in after work. It might just be an hour, or 30 minutes. But if I did that every day, 30 minutes every day for every day of the week, that's a couple of hours. I did that a couple of weeks in the month. That adds up. It's almost a day. And then you do that all year. I mean, you're doing quite a lot of work. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's only a couple of minutes. Yeah, that's right. But then you can look back, see where you've come, see what you're able to do, see what you're able to achieve, and there it feels good. So
beautiful. Your partner is in the game industry, right?
Yes. So she is a narrative designer. Yeah.
You think the conversation you had would have been the same if she was in game industry or not in the game industry? Or does it not matter?
Well, she's a wonderful person, so I think whether or not she was or wasn't, she's very supportive. So certainly, whether she was working in industry or not, she was always supportive, and it will always be supportive. But it helps that you've got not only a sympathetic ear, but someone who understands. Understands your plight. Should we say if there is ever any trouble, whether it is in work or you're not in work, like in the university when we're looking for jobs. she understands. So yeah, that did help.
Okay. And then how important is networking to you and like for anyone else? Is it something that's been a huge impact in your life, or is it just something that's like, yeah, you should do it, but didn't really make life changing for me?
I would say critical. I
Mm.
At university, um, even starting as early as you can to just get some of those processes in place if you can. So starting into like first year, if you've got like a 3 year course, if you're a university student, and you're just getting into first year, yes, you're thinking about your work and you want to concentrate on the work you're doing, but you do need to pay some. I would stress you need to pay some attention to establishing a network. And if it's at a university with university students, that network firstly starts with the people around you. Those people who, like like whoever, like that person, that example, they will find themselves into the job. Their friends will. So that's your immediate network. Immediate network could also be your family and your friends, right? But that needs to grow if you want, like, to see more doors open for you and to be able to find more opportunities. So trying your best to be active on on social media, like where these things are useful. For
Hmm.
example, an environment artist has a lot of resources out there for ArtStation, for example. The Blocktober for level designers, where people are encouraged to do work and share it with others, and they get feedback from people, encouragement, and it feels like that's positive because that's networking, really, even if it's just sharing your work. As also going to, and I mean, this is hard during a global pandemic again, but going to events. I went to a number of events up and down the country while I was studying, and it was because I love games, and I'll always love games, and I wanted to see what sort of games are out there, and I'd get to play them. But then also because I got to meet the developers of those games,
Hmm.
and I learned from them. How was it like doing this process? I'm curious, and then you would just talk to them, and then maybe you just have a nice conversation with them. And firstly, you make a good friend, and that's fantastic. You make strangers and turn them into friends. What a lovely world. And the
Right?
second is also, if you need anything and you're connected in the same network, if you needed something, they needed something, you can help one another because that's what the network there, a positive network anyway, is there is for. So I'm very lucky. I've got friends who've been able to support me when times are rough, and give me feedback as well. I've got a network that give me feedback on my work when I'm trying to improve. And yeah, I feel like that's very healthy. And I do the same, of course, with them. Whenever they need me, or if they were asked my advice, then we'll talk honestly and we can share that back and forth. So networking is really important, especially if you're in a learning environment, and doing it as early as you can. Because it's not only, okay, speaking to this person will get me a job. It's not just that. It's this person will help me learn how to be a better person and how to then eventually get that job. And that's
Exactly.
just one part of it.
Hmm. No, all the people I've met doing this podcast, I've learned so much from everyone, from
Mm,
battling with mental, challenges, tribulations, with learning how new ways to think or new ways to like study, or just a lot of different things you get from a lot of variety of people. And it's like, wow, I actually understand the world better, people better, and this thing I'm learning better, like programming, you learn
mm,
different skills. So it's very important. I think networking is one of the most important things you can do, especially as a creative person. Like, sure, it's
yeah,
fine to get your job, stuff, but to really learn how each creative person does their own thing helps you improve yourself and be better and try new things and be more experimental. So yeah.
yeah. It helps you learn as well how to
Hmm.
communicate, socializing properly. And we have to work in a team. We have to work in a team sometimes with large teams with a large number of people and different personalities. And if not exposed to that, meeting people who think more about tools and things, like programmers are very deep in knowledge and in the computers, looking at numbers, script, and so on. They might think differently to someone who is who thinks in a different way, like an artist who thinks visually with adjectives, and then just learning how to communicate between the two. And you do that, yeah, by networking and learning how people talk to you and how you talk to them, and being receptive when you're doing something wrong and when you're doing something right, and then having that positive feedback loop. Then, okay, just talking to this person, I'm able to learn how I speak, they're speaking to me, this is good. Okay, maybe I said there, all this, it's all very helpful, and it helps you become a very valuable team member when you're doing it right too.
Hmm. Beautiful.
And then you fit naturally into a studio, and that's what studios I think are looking for, as just as much as they're looking for a very, very skilled, competent person who is very good in their discipline. They're looking for someone who is just a nice person.
Mm-hmm.
That's that.
No,
If you're trouble
seriously.
to work with, then no one will hire you. And if they did hire you, someone will find out that you're not a very nice person.
And then
And maybe it's time for some changes. Yeah, well, or maybe, not even gone to get out of here. Someone will pay notice and then tell you, and then it's time for change. So, and if you don't change, then you're out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, then we got a problem.
Yeah.
Now, for level design, how do you practice that? How does someone get improve their level design? Do they just recreate levels, or they think about why the level's built that way? How do you do it?
Cool. Well, I would then ask, at what level? So, where would you start? If, for example, if you're brand new to the process, or if you're already involved in the process. So I'll turn that back to you. Where, from what point would you say?
Let's go with the fundamentals of level design.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. So, if I were to say, would sort of put together an activity that could try to condense a lot of this sort of stuff, I would say one activity that does this quite remarkably well, though it's two-dimensional as opposed to 3D, it's accessible. Everyone could do this. Are you aware, of Dungeons and Dragons, and you've got top-down maps for Dungeons and Dragons, usually little boards like that. A lot of those are hand-drawn, or at least they used to be. They'd just be put on grid paper. Here's where you move this many squares. This kind of activity where you look down at that, and especially in that game, you look down at that grid paper and go, what do I want my players to do in this space? Is it a combat space? Usually when you're doing this inside of D&D, it is combat. So let's just think, okay, it's a combat encounter. So what enemies are my players facing? And then that's another question. What enemy types? So are they doing something which is like a ranged spell, or are they doing a melee attack? That's just two examples. But essentially, what are you trying to tell your players? Are you trying to push them through your environment? Are you trying to pull them towards something? Is there an objective in that little slate that you've just drawn there? Somewhere they need to go? Where is that placed? How do you communicate that? Can they see it when they when they move into that space? So all of these things. And as soon as you put that pen to paper, well, for me anyway, whenever I put pen to paper and make those kind of encounters, I'm thinking about all these things. What do they see? What is the experience? How do they feel? What are they doing in the encounter? Should it be or not should it be, sorry, I guess. What should be, I guess, the end result, really? What would be a failure? And with D&D particularly, it comes down to me and how I'm able to communicate that. If it depends on the success of that encounter, not how they play it and their success, but do they understand what I was trying to communicate to them? All of these principles can be moved into other areas. You can move this into 3D. You can move this into all areas of development in whatever project, and especially here in level design. I remember even taking that example, seeing a job application years ago which made D&D, like being a DM of many years, a requirement. I've never seen this ever in my life, but made it a requirement for a job. And this was a highly, highly respected studio.
Crazy.
Still is, making AAA games, and still are, for a very particular job in that design department.
Wow.
Well, it was CD Projekt Red.
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't know
You had to have a D&D background in order to, I believe it was like a world builder or something like this, but it was like a requirement. You need to know this sort of stuff. And yeah, that was years ago. They might have been doing, maybe.
Yeah.
It might have been even the Wild Hunt. That was even years ago. Wild Hunt, because it's RPG. It's how is the story communicated to you, and then how are the encounters communicated to you? Because if we go into a D&D game, or we go into any 3D game, World of Warcraft, anything, and we think, me and you, we've got the best armor in the game, we've got the best weapons in the game, nobody can touch us, and we walk into an encounter, it's just a little simple cave, and there's a little one enemy there, and he's like this big, and then he hits us once, and we die. none of that difficulty level was communicated to us. We need to know what we're getting in for. Okay, so how could I do that? Is it not only dialogue? Oh, watch out. There's like, it's a small little bunny rabbit, but if it touches you, you're dead. Now that sometimes is a bit too abrupt. It's a bit too much. And also someone could miss that. So how else do we do it? Is it we communicate that in the environment somehow? What shapes are we using to communicate danger? Be careful. And in D&D, it's verbal because it's all imagination. But in games, we're doing this visually. We're doing this through audio. And all of this, when done right, can convey that right sense in this example of danger. And you might want to pace ourselves. When we walk into this area, we might go, right, well, let's spot it first because we've been told by that NPC it's quite dangerous here. And also all the shapes in this space might be quite sharp, or there might be an area which is quite claustrophobic. So we're kind of funneled in. So we kind of know what we're getting in for. Then it might open up into a wide space. You know, when you walk into a big space, it goes into a big boss fight. Okay, right. Okay, and then you see all the ammo everywhere.
Like,
those sorts of things are very markable, like examples, like very, very simple examples. But yeah, companies like CD Projekt Red, like Naughty Dog, they do this really subtly. And it's not just by dropping loads of ammo just before a boss fight. It's usually like with a little key cinematic where like you lose control for a moment and then something's explained to you, or you're given control and then something is removed where you otherwise had like a certain item. You know, if you remember running through, I think it's Uncharted 4, and you have no weapons now, and you're that sort of feeling of I've got no guns, and it gives you that feeling. Oh no, I'm vulnerable.
yeah.
Those things, those are very subtle.
That was that
That was
end?
just as you on the boat with Sam, and then you land on the sands of the beaches, and you've got no guns now.
Yeah.
And so all those guns you collected was for naught. Yeah, it gives you a feeling, it gives you a sense, it conveys a mood, and when it does that, your players are feeling something, and we want our players to experience something.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, that's why we do this. So for Rocksteady, that was your first AAA job?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so then, you were doing level design, right?
I was working there. I was hired first as a junior environment artist, then working as an environment artist. But yeah, it's inside of Rocksteady. They say company that values, I would say, seniority, and there's a very, very talented design team there. And yeah, I just found that it might be difficult it might take a little bit of time to sidestep into that position that I felt like I maybe didn't want to, or didn't have, it might be a couple of years that I was needed in my role as an artist. And I thought, you know what, I kind of want to take this elsewhere. So yeah, and so I moved into a level design position after building that portfolio outside of work. But I was working with designers very closely. And in some studios, the work that I was doing there as an environment artist, some studios would consider level design work. And because everywhere's different. Not all of it, but some of it. But so, and that's where I made the decision then. So I saw I'm up for the challenge, and I decided to go elsewhere. So, and I'm now at nDreams as a level designer. So still in London.
Yeah, can't go wrong with London. For the job at Rock City, you played Arkham City and Arkham Knight, right?
Oh yeah.
So how was that like when you were working at Rocksteady and being part of the people who made those games?
I have a very, very like it's I can picture it like now, like as it was clear as if it happened yesterday, me playing the demo for Arkham Asylum because I was very young and I couldn't afford the actual game.
Same.
So I downloaded the demo it was Xbox 360, and I just played it over and over and over and over. I did that as a kid. I just played the same thing over and over and over. I played Halo like that. I played Time Splitters like that. Just round and round and round, because usually I didn't have internet and I didn't have multiplayer support. So I just play the same level over and over again and just try different approaches. And that game was so phenomenal, where you actually felt like, and I mean, yes, it's cliche with the be the Batman, but you in no other game did you really feel like Batman. You did all the detective stuff, you did all the combat, and so yeah. Then having that experience, I can remember where I sat. I can remember like what shirt I was wearing and like what my haircut was like. Everything I could picture that moment, and then walking through the doors and seeing on their reception Rocksteady. It was it's one of the best experiences of my life. I remember the phone call when I got asked, okay, well, not asked, I was like, we would like to offer you the job. Would you like to? I remember that phone call fondly. It was a massive moment for me.
I'm guessing you got a massive cake that day. You were like, I did it, I made it. I support myself.
Well, that's important too. Every time I've ever got offered a job, or offered a job, not like I was just asked. I worked hard to get that job. I go for interviews and I'm like anticipating, please can I get this job? And then they ask. That's what I mean by that. But every time I get to that stage and then I accept, I make a good. I make a promise to myself every time I go out and I get myself something, like a reward, something, I do something, or I get something that is, and usually it's an art book, actually. So I remember at that time I got a Titanfall statue, actually, because Titanfall.
Oh, I was like, okay.
Yeah, it's like a little pop figure that's behind me. I got that. I remember buying that.
Up there?
That's what I got for working at Rocksteady for 2 years. You get a little Batman statue. But yeah, it was important for me that when I got that little offer, I was like, you know what, you did it. Let's celebrate. And in my way, in that case, was celebrating. And it always has been this little tradition. I just get something for myself, little something. So yeah, little art book. I remember I got my first job when I was at AVR. I got myself that book. I got the Alien Isolation book for another job. Yeah, all these sorts of things, and that's why I've got a big old stack of books there. And they're sentimental to me. Big cake.
I like that system though, because I never really heard that from a lot of people where they like the reward system. I've heard of discipline, blah blah, but nobody's been so like on it with you like you are with the reward system. I'm gonna try some of that. I'm trying to reward myself. I usually don't like. I'm just like, all right, I should do it. I need to do it. Discipline, but
yeah, it doesn't necessarily need to be things.
True.
It could just be I would like to reward myself with something, any resource that you value. And in my case, I love artwork, and I love these artworks because some of these books are packed and with like from processes from the beginning to the end, and it's just like wonderful. Some it could just be a video game. I'm going to buy. You know what? I'm going to celebrate. I'm going to buy this video game I really wanted to play. But yeah, reward yourself. If you've done something that is an achievement, and you should feel good about it. And if the feeling's not enough, and usually the feeling is enough, but you should say, yes, this is a milestone for me. You know what? I deserve something. I'm going to do this for me. As long as that doesn't hurt anyone.
Yeah, right. Yeah, don't be doing any weird stuff out there.
Exactly. I'm going to watch that. I'm going to go to the cinema, even if it's on my own. I don't care. I'm going to go to cinema because I enjoyed this and I've earned this. You know what? This is good.
I'm gonna watch Mandalorian all night because of that. I love it. So I want to hear a story about going to nDreams. What was that like? The whole situation.
I remember when I got the call. This is, I had to think to myself. A little part of my brain went, "Did we tell you? Did we say this story?" I was like, you know what? It's a sort of a personal story. It's pretty. So it's like a weird one. So I got the call, and it was, "Hey, we'd like to give you the job." No, it was an email. That was it. It was an email, and I was sitting quite comfortably inside of my position at Rocksteady. And I was offered a different job. And I remember walking into the other room where my partner was working. This is all remotely again. And I remember sitting on the kitchen counter, and my partner looks at me and she says to me that it looked like you had heard some really bad news. And to me, it was a devastating moment because essentially I had to make a choice. And it was the choice that I explained earlier from university moving forward. I had to decide which path I wanted to take. I was at a divergence. I had one which I'm very comfortable in, and then another one which is new, and it's something that I do also want. And so I remember feeling very, very sad, very torn, I would say. I won't lie, I had a little bit of a moment where I actually had a little bit of shed a little tear,
Hmm.
and just like because I love that team. I'm friends with everyone there. I have made a family at that company, um, and so I can only give them good praise. You know, from Ben Keeling, Andrew Stewart, those guys, they were great. So it was hard to make that decision. It was a very, very hard decision, and so to say goodbye was very emotional. But then on the other side, like everything, when you let your past self die, certainly,
I
in
like
a
it. Yeah.
certain way, and you then become someone new. In this case, I take a new path, I have a new job, I meet a new team. I was very lucky here that I've settled into a design position with a wonderful team here as well. So yeah, I'm very lucky. It's not everyone's luck that they go from one
That's
good
true.
team to the next, right? So,
Hmm.
yeah, but it was a hard decision to make. I cannot stress that enough. But you know what? I think it was the decision that I needed to take while I could, and everyone there was very supportive of that. Yeah, even if
That's
they
really
didn't
nice
want to
too.
see me
Everybody
go.
was like, yeah, they're like, we want the best for you.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, but
Yeah.
yes, it was very tough.
Yeah, I bet. So for those like situations, what would you tell somebody? Like, because your main motivation was to change something new, like go
New
off and
challenges.
yeah.
Yeah.
So if somebody in that situation, would you advise them that like, hey, you never know, might not be good, might be bad, but the regret you'll have if you don't go, knowing the experience this new change will be worse than where you are now, I guess.
Hmm. Maybe when you put it like that, I might be inclined to just push back a little bit, or even just say like there needs to be something else added there. Because if something is safe, like for example, a good relationship, or and you feel comfortable in that relationship. I mean, just because you're comfortable and something pops up that's exciting and it's new, is it right to to give that away and then just pursue something new if you're happy in that situation? So there's something in there, but so with the question, maybe there's um, is it right for you? Is it
I think
right for
that's
your future self
yeah.
as well? And maybe I can't. I don't know if I
It's
have the
more
words, but
there.
there's something there as well. There's
Yeah,
something just a little bit different because it could have been an absolute mistake. And
this is
if I
true.
had left that company or done something else, and then in the future I regret doing this,
Yeah.
then that works the same way. Uh, but it felt like, and it still feels like, that this will be beneficial for me and my future self. Um, and yeah, so that was the reason I took it. Because yeah, sometimes you could make the wrong decision.
Yeah, I think
I
it
don't
just
know.
really
There's
comes
something
down
there.
to what feels right for you. It shows. Okay, I think your example more or less just shows that even if you make the choice where you leave, it can still work out for you, and if somebody else can show the same example for staying and it works out. So you just see that and say,
Mm,
I got to do what feels right for me, and
yeah,
that's a lot of people because all the people listening have their own story, their own circumstances, and you don't know what's happening, but you have to make the best decision for yourself.
yeah,
I
yeah,
will
yeah.
say I've noticed that the when you feel like you need to take a risk and then you do take that risk, usually it works out for you. And if it doesn't, it's fine. But most people are fighting with taking the risk itself. The fear of the risk failing gets people right there. And there's not even that question of is this right for my future? It's more is this am I kind of be comfortable feeling uncomfortable with this new job, these new people,
Mm,
but like I feel like most at the end of the day, you those moments will bring the best of you will
mm,
be you'll learn to face challenges. And even if it does go wrong, it's another stepping stone to something even better probably after that. So, you know,
mm.
yeah.
Then also, yeah, to counter that, and I support what you say, certainly, but to counter that as well, to take unnecessary risk, can will well maybe will lead to, well, it's of course it's the unknown and tackling the unknown,
Yeah.
but unnecessary risk will inevitably lead you down a bad path. Like something will trip you up. That
Yeah.
is just you're opening yourself up for failure. Now, failures can be helpful, but yeah, unnecessarily, yeah.
I
So
think
there's
that's
like an in
where
between, right? And there's
yeah,
and so really thinking about it, and that was part of that process and thinking about it myself. And I thought about it for a long time. It's not that I was applying for jobs for a long time, but I was thinking about whether or not I wanted to take a chance somewhere or to any of that for a long while. And I think it helps when we're in those places and in that mindset, helps to be honest with yourself. If you're, for example, if you're not happy in a job, or if you feel like something isn't satisfying, it's just something's like, it's mental health, anything. But it's like we said earlier, recognize that you're down, or not, you're not yourself, and then make adjustments to change it. And what adjustments you could make, I mean, you might not know, so communicate it. So you're, as long as you're honest with yourself and then you're honest with other people, then you can diagnose the problem. And so as soon as I noticed that I would like a change in my life at all of those points that we've described in this conversation, I then was honest that, okay, well, something needs to change. I'll talk to someone else about it. I'll get their opinion. I'll try also formulate my own. And as I talk to more people, my thoughts gather and I speak about it. I can then speak freely, and then I can think freely, and then I come to my resolution. And it feels like every time I do that, I've made the right choice each time.
Mm-hmm. I think it also goes full circle to the whole discipline, where sure there's unnecessary risk, but what more I mean manageable risks, meaning like you disciplined when you're savings, so you already have this job up, like this opportunity. So now you're like, hey, I have the money saved up and I already have this job here. I'll take that one. Sure, it's a risk, but I'm good enough. If this all fails, I'm set for a year. Like stuff like that. So it's like you got to be disciplined in your risks too. I feel like that's a smart way. Again, work smarter. We want to do all these cool things, but be smart about every decision you make. But also plan. Like if you plan to like want to eventually go to new things, plan this out so that way you can take this risk, but it's manageable because you have money saved up. All these things, again, factors you have to include. But
Absolutely.
yeah, so it is again up to the person. Have you taken the discipline to save up money? Are you doing the right option? Is this the next job going to be the right place, or are you just doing it to escape? A lot of things you have to think about on your own. So yeah, I like this little discussion because I think it'll help a lot of people, because a lot of people will think what we're thinking now, and I think we just verbally said everything that might go through their head. It's like yeah, so
Absolutely, yeah. So I think I came into that situation many times over the course of my life, and especially my adult life, and yeah, a lot of knockbacks too. And so I remember being told by I think this was like a college tutor at one point. Like told that you'll never, if you leave this course, for example, because I did at one point. I left after I got all my A levels, which is what you need to go to university. And I took that year and I went to another course. I left that course and I was told by those tutors, I remember one of them said, you'll never get into university and you'll never get into that industry unless you finish this course. And I remember going, no. And then no, like, why? And it was because they saw that I wasn't doing like finger painting art, and instead I was doing concept art, because they didn't believe that that was actual job. Like they didn't understand. They thought this was cheating. They didn't understand that all these professionals doing concept art were getting paid to do this, and they are very skilled in what they do. And it's not just because like they take photographs of themselves naked in the bath, like that, that sort of stuff. She didn't value that work, so she tried to put me down. So yeah, that felt bad at the time. But then when I did get, and it was very soon, like in that time scale, I remember getting admitted into that university course. Admitted, my application was approved. Like they said, yes, welcome aboard. I felt like good about it because I'd worked hard to get there, and I proved her wrong. And so yes, you get knockbacks like that, but at all those points, it's just healthy to know when you're down and do what you can to identify where there's a problem and do something about it bit by bit. And in that case, the problem that I had was, I think then it was I wasn't doing the right work on that course, and so I changed it. They didn't like, the course tutors didn't like it, but it was good for me. And it was, and if I didn't do that, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be working in games right now. I'd be teaching art history in a college or a school somewhere. Not to diss people who teach art history.
But it wasn't your thing.
It's not my thing.
Mm-hmm. And then what about your new studio, new job feels just right? What about
what about it? So
what about it?
I think where before So here's the crux of it, where the decision point was made. Why when you sat in the kitchen did you choose to go to nDreams as a designer as opposed to stay at Rocksteady as an environment artist? And it was because I realized that I now think differently. A artist thinks, someone very smart told me this, if they listen they'll know who they are. If an artist thinks with adjectives, descriptive words, uses those words to communicate and convey their work. How does my environment look like? What color the grass be? Okay, what does that convey? What shape of the buildings? Do they look like this? All of those are all adjectives, they're descriptive words, descriptive language. I didn't think like that anymore after working really closely with designers, and instead I thought with verbs. What am I doing in this space? What is the player supposed to do? What am I encouraging them? Are they walking, running, jumping, shooting, swimming, driving, so on? For absolutely any space you look at inside of games, if you think one of those two things first, that usually, in this case, and I could be wrong, but usually indicates which one you might be. Now, it's not that you don't think the other way. It's not that when I think about things, adjectives and so on, that I'm not thinking about verbs, but what one takes priority. And so always when you're making games, function is followed by form, no matter what, no matter if you're an environmentalist or not, you have to follow the design. But it was when I identified that, it was when when I recognized that maybe this design thing is so coming back to your question, I'm now able to not only think about this in such a way where I'm like thinking about what mechanics of this game are we using, what can my players do in this space, what do I want them to do. I also have a little bit more control over some of that stuff too. So where before in all number of roles as an artist you're given a little bit of direction, you can feedback to the designer, but as really you're trying your best to contextualize the spaces that you're given. Now I feel like I'm able to create some of those encounters myself. Like essentially I make the game, I help make the game rather than make the game look pretty. And some people, many people, are absolutely happy with making beautiful, beautiful pieces of work. And those people are amazing at what they do. I enjoyed it, and I still enjoy a lot of that to this day. But I just enjoyed making making something that is really essentially like playable, and I see what my players are doing. I get immediate feedback when it's good or bad. That sorts of things, right? Like. And yeah, that's what I feel like in my day-to-day now at nDreams, is that I get to create those spaces, and thinking about gameplay in that way too. Maybe I didn't answer that as well as I would like, but
no, you answered
it's a tough question.
I mean, you can probably go more into it, but no, you answered it perfectly. As in, like the design part is why you wanted to do the move. You were now doing something that makes you more happy, or you're fulfilled more.
Yeah,
makes sense to me.
I think a little bit of that too comes from when I actually started to then DM Dungeons and Dragons games. Now playing games, like, so if, for example, if I just said, if I replaced D&D with any video game, anything, any board game, anything, rather than playing the game, enjoying it as a player, I created the experience. When I started to do that, and I had players who played in my game each week, and they were enjoying the encounters that I was creating, they enjoyed the world that I was building, and everything, all of that was of my design. And it's not because it's mine, it's because I could see immediately what worked and what didn't work, and that was really satisfying. And you can try your best to infer like what you should be doing and what you can do, and then you see what choices they make, and that was just so satisfying to create that experience. That also pushed me over the edge. I do design, because essentially those are dungeons and dungeon masters. They just do it in a different way.
No, it's beautiful. Now, when you play like Last of Us, do you ever think of like design stuff like this, or you're just enjoying the experience?
The first time, no, because it encapsulates, it
Hmm.
just wraps you up.
It
A good
does.
game will do that, even to people who work in games. You forget, or a good movie, if you thinking about movies and you're thinking about how they're written and how it's all shot. A good movie and a good game, all of these things, when done really well, it just immerses you. And so I remember the first time I played that, I was in uh, I did a 48-hour gaming marathon for charity, and so we stayed up all during that whole time, 48 hours, no sleep. And in that time, I played The Last of Us. I remember crying a couple times. It was the
Oh.
sleep, I swear. But I didn't see any of the design stuff. But I wasn't in games either. So, but then playing it, I think I play it maybe even I think the last time I even played it was about 2 months ago. I play it religiously, and it's a problem. I really enjoy that game. And for anyone who's like, it's a single player game. It has multiplayer, and I play that a lot too. But I played the single player game, and I've probably played that and completed it from beginning to end, maybe about 15 to something times.
15 times?
Absolutely, yes,
Oh my,
yes.
wow.
And on Grounded, which if people have played that game on
Oh
Grounded,
no.
yes, it's hard. But yeah, you start to see that you play it so much it becomes like practice, and then you start to see where the cues are, where the triggers would be. Sure, but you also start to see what sort of messaging you're being given, and why those decisions are made, and gaps as well, like why where things are a problem, where things fall short, where things could be improved. Yeah, for many people who make games, it's hard to enjoy games because sometimes you see even like the smallest thing. There's always a mistake in these things. That's just we're all human.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can see a couple of them here and there. But overall, I think certainly a masterpiece.
And how did you feel about Last of Us Part 2?
I will I will duck out of that question. I look. I am one who feels that if something is enjoyed on its own, it can be enjoyed on its own, and it ends definitively, it's okay to leave that alone. And it's very hard where we work and live inside of essentially a society where we want more and we always want more. Give me
Yeah.
more. I want more context. I want more story. I want more of what you just gave me. And if something ends so definitively as that game does, so I remember as soon as it was announced, it's not because the game came out and like I had a different opinion. It was as soon as it was announced, and people who know me know that I'm telling the truth. I said, I'm very dubious of this because the game in the first game ended so well. And yes, it ended on a cliffhanger. And yes, people want to know what that cliffhanger means. What is lovely, and it's really, really hard to capture these days, is ambiguity. And just leave it out there. Just say,
So did you
you
play
know
Last of
what?
Us 2 though?
I did. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
It's an interesting game.
yeah.
We'll leave it at that.
That's what I mean. So I liked the ending of The Last of Us, the first one, and so because of that, and because there was so much ambiguity, there's so many. I think people had different expectations, and I had different experiences with the second.
And when you say different expectations, you also mean yourself.
Absolutely, yeah, no, and I think because if we to get into it as brief as I can, I liked that at the beginning, at the very end of the game. Spoilers, anyone who's not played The Last of Us, what's wrong with you? I liked that there's that conflict. Does she know he's lying? And what they all went through together to get to that point, what he took from her by making that decision, and what that means. I don't really care what happens afterwards. I liked the journey I went on in that experience,
Yeah.
and I had my kind of own view of what maybe that was all about and what she thought and what he was trying to do. But it didn't matter to me what happened afterwards. And then when someone else tries to tell me a story then where it continues and continues and continues until they die or until they move on and get married, I'm not invested in that as much as I was the first. So that's all. I think that's as best as I can
Hmm.
best as I can
No,
put
that's
together.
beautifully said.
It's the same if I were to make Inception 2, for example, and take Christopher
It's almost
Nolan's.
impossible, but yeah.
Absolutely. You can't take that character and spinning top and then go, by the way, yeah, it fell down and and he was not dreaming. Oh, I kind of liked the idea that there was an ambiguity there, but some people really want an answer. And yeah, I think it's unfortunate sometimes that we can't just allow ambiguity, because it's a product.
We should, because
We
that's
want to
what
make money.
stories are. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like if
but it
you
is
go
a
into the
product.
real world, well, that's true that. But if you go into the real world and you start answering these questions, it gets boring. It gets too real. Like you start to answer every question. It's like, no, this was a story, a moment, impactful. Boom, we're done. Tell the next story of something else. I mean, some sequels are better, like Dark Knight, for instance. Batman Begins was amazing, and Dark Knight was phenomenal.
Yeah,
But like it's harder when you have something like The Last of Us, because even then I was like, there really can't be a second one. And I saw this first trailer and I was like, oh, they're changing things up. That's the only way I can see it being good. And then it came out and I was like, was it good? Was it not? I don't know.
Well, I remember feeling very excited when I saw the trailer. However, there was still this creeping doubt. And then I remembered, you know what? And I played I played the first one again. I was like, I'm not sure. And so that's always been the case with me for years. So you go to The Dark Knight is a perfect example, because The Dark Knight was a gem. And I remember when I went into the cinema with my dad to see that, and we walked out, and I remember there was a newspaper on the car, on the passenger seat, and we picked it up. And I remember driving on the way home after watching the movie and reading a review in this newspaper, and the headline of the article was something like, because it was many years ago, something like, dear Chris Nolan, please do not make a sequel. And it was imploring him, do not do it, because this was so good. You cannot capture that magic again. It's like the poison chalice. You cannot encapsulate such a masterpiece in that movie in a sequel. Best you just don't try. And so I remember that watching the third one, The Dark Knight Rises, it doesn't have the same magic to it, right? There's something in it. It's lightning in a bottle in that second movie. It's the Joker. It's the journey that they go through. It's the ending. It's how everything surprises you. The music, all of it. There's a lot of that in the third one, but it's just not there in the same way. And so I think most people look at the second one as like the Holy Grail. But the third one is like, yeah, it's okay. It's a brilliant movie, but it's not as good as the second one. And I think that's what I would say with The Last of Us 2. It's a good game.
No, I agree.
But the first one is better. That's all. So.
Yeah. We'll see what happens in time, because I know people have their views and all this stuff. But I think it's an interesting game, and I think I'm applaud what they did, because not most games go in that distance and go far in changing things. But like, I think it should have been its own other game. On different characters.
It's a really difficult conversation, because if I made something, like I'm sure that a lot of the developers there, if you made something in the first one and you wanted to give people more of that magic, I mean, it's on you. It's your onus to give them that, and you should feel that passion, as I'm sure they all did, like we all do when we make these games, to give players something that they really enjoy and that they value that experience. Now, it's a harrowing experience to play that game. But regardless, the messages and the intent is still there. But yeah, like I think that's where we are in, like, as a society, and how we make these things. And it's also a product. And if something does really well and it just works on its own, you really have to have a lot of power behind you to say, no, we're going to leave that there. And I think that's a lot of that is kept to films, really, because how games are such a product that you need. If you make something so amazing, the amount of awards that thing won, you got to make something as like to follow it up, right? So yeah, it's got to be hard, like, absolutely.
All right, so now I want to get into a challenge for the GameDev.tv students. If you can come up with like a short challenge, probably based around level design or environmental art, and give it to the listeners. You can take as much time as you need.
A challenge.
Yeah.
And working with what parameters? Any? I can come up with them?
Anything, yeah.
Okay, cool. Right. I would say there's a really cool thing. I think me and my partner were talking about this as well, actually. We were like, okay, there's a little graph you could come up with, or a series of graphs. And they had like a series of different words. So one would be a place, and then this table would have had a number of places on there, not like locations, not like London or Paris or New York, but then they would be very vague locations, surface of Mars or a mountaintop, and allows you room for imagination. And then another table which would have like a blueprint for a game, for example, could be like a first-person game, or a cover shooter, or a stealth, like a classic stealth game, or anything. Platformer, you name it. And then having a bunch of those tables, I'm sure we could find like something like this on the internet, but something like that, that's quick and easy to do. And yeah, you can really come up with something on the fly quite quick. That, I mean, that would be one example I'd give. Would that answer your question, or would you be looking? Or are you looking for something more? We can give you more.
No, just a simple challenge for listeners to do after the podcast. Something
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so
I would
say a good one, and yeah, if not, if you have a better one, then we can go with that one.
Try write a D&D one shot.
Okay.
A one shot meaning, so a D&D game means a campaign, like usually that lasts for a long time. A one shot being that it's usually one session with one group. They all join, and then once the game is over, that's it. It's done. So think about what that one shot is like. How do you start? What's your entrance like? And how do you introduce your players? And again, all this stuff transferable. What is the journey like? Getting to the place you need them to get to. What is the encounter like? How many of them are there? Do you want role play, or do you want just fighting? What are your players looking for? What are your players doing? And what enemies are you using? What places did you choose when you build that encounter? And this is very easy for anyone to do, because they don't need like a high-tech rig. They don't need software that a lot of us have. I'm very lucky to have. It's very expensive too. They could do this just writing this on pen or paper, and I would encourage people to do that, certainly. And then the best way of testing it, like we do in games, going to QA, is sharing it with people, or even just running the game yourself. And that's a big old challenge, but you would see immediately when things don't work and when things really work, and that is satisfying.
Yeah, so I think it's a great challenge. I can't wait to see what the GameDev.tv students do. And so this has been an amazing conversation. Learned a lot, went through a lot of good stuff, and I just want to say thank you for coming on the show. It took us a while, but it was worth it. I promise you.
No, I appreciate what you said there. That's very nice. Yeah, I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for. It's good that we're able to do this sort of long form too. I've done this in the past. I usually find it's very short, and so yeah, I enjoy that we're. I appreciate that we were able to spend the time talking together.
I feel like the longer it is, the more you can actually get out the real stuff. Like there's always the answers, but there's like that stuff where it's like people can relate to that. They're like, oh, I understand how we got to that position, or why you thought that, or. That's when people get the most value out of it. So yeah, awesome.
I appreciate it, and yeah, I'll just say as well, if anyone else who was listening felt like, I mean, I'm sure you'd say the same. If anyone wanted to reach out to yourself and me and just ask a question, because this comes back to that networking thing we were talking about earlier. It doesn't necessarily mean to be events or people you know immediately, but if you sent the people that you see online, like a polite message asking like any questions that you had. If anyone sent something like that to, I'm sure, like Kevin, I'm sure you'd say the same. If they sent a message to you, I'm sure you'd get back to them. And I just want to put my hand up and say, yeah, if there's anything that I could do to answer any questions anyone has, please feel free to find me somewhere online and just ping me a message. I will find the time to get back to you as soon as I can. I want to be as helpful as I can, and this is why I wanted to jump on the podcast, talk to your viewers, and see where I could be of help and pay it forward.
No, I agree the same way. Yeah, anybody reaches out, I'll help you out. I've even gotten some people who talked about stuff we actually talked about in this podcast, which is why I went deeper into it, because it's like I know this helps a lot of people.
Yeah.
And then so usually the way I end it off is I just hand the mic to you if you want to do any shout outs, last inspirational quote, which you kind of already done, but yeah, just send it off if you want them to go to Twitter or anywhere else important they want to check out.
Cool. Yeah, I suppose to all the things that all the people we've mentioned thus far, right? Like all the people that I've worked for in the past, you have just been mentioned, and yeah, all those places have been fantastic. But other than like sort of shout outs, really, I'd say, yeah, you can find me. So Sean Gorman online on Twitter, on LinkedIn, You'll also find me on my website as well, where I have a little blog there, gormandev.com. So yeah, anywhere at all where you found me, if you wanted to ping me a message, I would be happy to then talk to you and help where I can. Other than that, for all of the projects that I've worked on in the past and where some of them are still being worked on, keep an eye out for those. And then, watch this space for more things to come in the future. But that's really me. That's all I can say for now.
Well, that's it. Thanks for listening. You can find all courses at GameDev.tv or in the show notes at a discounted price. Get started with your game development journey today.